The reason that we have some of the people who spoke earlier from the, let's call it the external perspective session on the platform again is that some tables have indicated there are aspects of clarification that they wish to have from some of the speakers. We're not into a second round of advocacy. We're into issues of clarification. But we are also still happy that Neville is here with us and Leah, who has helped us very much in selecting our experts for today, is also here. And so maybe we'll start off with Neville responding to some of the matters that have arisen in the course of the afternoon and that have been arisen in the course of this most recent roundtable discussion. So Neville is going to start. Leah will make a contribution then, and after that we'll come back to you for any questions that any of you may have, which may possibly be directed on this side of the room or that side of the room. Okay, Neville.
Well, thanks very much. And first of all, could I say thank you to all the external speakers who I listened to with great interest, and indeed to all of you for your questions, which I've listened to with great interest. And it's kind of, for someone in my job, it's always nice to learn. And I've learned a great deal from talking to you about my own thoughts on this issue, such as they are. Before I kind of summarize the main questions that I feel have arisen today, I just want to make one quick point, which is in respect of the question of the reference to Ireland's blasphemy law at the United Nations. And just to clear up one thing, Owen was asked a question and I shouted something after him, but to be honest, I probably should have listened to the full question before I did. I thought he was being asked a different question. I thought he was being asked the question of whether emerging blasphemy laws in certain Islamic states were being directly based on the Irish statute. That is to say, not the defamation of religion resolutions of the United Nations, but whether specific laws were. And there had been, I felt, some inaccurate reporting on this, but Michael Nugent's quite correct to point out that at the United Nations, Organization of Islamic Cooperation States were referencing the fact of an emerging and new Western blasphemy law in support of their proposals to have a defamation of religion resolution. So I apologize, it was entirely my fault because I thought a different question was being asked than the one that was actually being asked. In terms of the questions that I think that have arisen, I think you can group them in the following way. First of all, there's a question as to the exact role which the blasphemy clause plays within the Constitution. And as I said at the beginning today, I'm expressing no opinion on it, and I've no firm views in this at all. But on the factual question of what's the role, in light of the fact that the Defamation Act now has a specific statutory statement of the crime of blasphemy, the answer is that the 2009 Act now does what the Constitution requires. In other words, the two don't do separate things. The Constitution says that blasphemy shall be a crime. The 2009 Act tells us how the crime operates. So therefore, the point of definition for the DPP, if he or she decides that, or is questioning whether to prosecute for blasphemy, is the 2009 Act, which gives effect and gives flesh to the mandatory requirements in the Constitution. If you abolish the constitutional clause, does that mean that the blasphemy statute falls? No. It's perfectly legitimate for the statute to exist without a direct constitutional grounding. Most of our statutes exist without direct constitutional grounding. Now, obviously, a statute can't be repugnant to the Constitution, but neither does it have to have an express textual basis. The next question, which was regularly asked, was in relation to the incitement to hatred legislation. And this links with something else, which is why are the other Venice Commission boxes not ticked for Ireland? Why have we nothing against sacrilege? Why have we nothing against protecting places of worship and so on? I don't know why we don't. I would have assumed, though, that there isn't really an appetite now for increased laws to protect religion and religious sensitivities. There was, you remember, a very significant furore in respect of the publication of that manifestation of what is now the Defamation Act of 2009 by virtue of the fact that it contained a statutory statement of blasphemy. in terms of the incitement to hatred legislation, the point that I was making is that it's very difficult to prosecute in practice. It was enacted in response to a call from the United Nations Human Rights Committee that Ireland would have a law against incitement to religious hatred because it was perceived that this was necessary as a result of Article 20 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, which you needn't think about ever again for the rest of your lives. In other words, it was brought in as a response to this perceived international obligation, as indeed the whole Defamation Act was, not the blasphemy section, but the whole Defamation Act was produced because it was felt that it was necessary to give publishers greater defences when faced with a defamation action. So that's why it's there. My point is that it's simply very difficult to operate in practice. To my knowledge, it hasn't successfully been operated in practice. Finally, I mean, I suppose one question which has arisen, which Brona raised in the first section, which gave me considerable pause for thought, is the question of the practical versus the symbolic impact of this. Does blasphemy legislation or the clause in the Constitution have any practical effect? No. There hasn't been a blasphemy prosecution since 1855. Corway wasn't a blasphemy prosecution, it was an application for leave to bring a prosecution. The blasphemy laws have absolutely no practical impact in Ireland. I think that they're conceptually massively different to the laws in Pakistan and so on. I think that the Pakistani suggestion that they can justify in anyone's eyes their laws by reference to Ireland's laws is absolutely bogus and completely ignores the fact that apart from the blasphemy nature of the laws, their deficiencies are in the fact that they don't respect due process and the sanctions are massively disproportionate. I don't think you could, on any fair or reasonable analysis, ground a justification for the Pakistan law on what Ireland is doing. But the significance, I think, at the moment of the blasphemy clause is entirely symbolic. In other words, if you remove it, are you, to take Brona's point earlier, are you symbolically reducing the protection for religion? Or, on the other hand, as the representatives from the Irish Council of Civil Liberties, Irish Human Rights Organisation and Atheist Ireland made the point, symbolically, is it an affront to the way we want to do business that we do have this clause in the Constitution? And to my mind, and I think this came up in a number of questions, that ultimately is the only game in town here. It's not a question of people likely to face prosecutions. We're not going to have people being executed in this country for blasphemy. I don't think we're ever going to have anyone prosecuted for blasphemy. As is kind of not unusual insofar as constitutions are concerned, you're dealing with something which has symbolic value. And from listening to you, and especially from listening to the external observers, it's got significant symbolic value. But there are two sides to the argument. There's those who would like the symbolic value of protection of religion and those who would oppose it. And to my mind, I think that's what this is about. And again, I just thank you for the very interesting questions, which have certainly informed my knowledge of this area, which is begun about 20 years ago and presumably won't stop anytime soon. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Leah has some things to say as well.
Okay, thank you, Chairman. I think I understand now why Neville became an academic rather than a practitioner in this area. Yeah, I've very little to add really, other than really three things. The first is that the questions, as always at this convention, have been excellent, and they tend to cover all of the possible questions that one might imagine, so it's great that it all gets aired. Several people actually asked about the comparative table that was included in Owen's report, and that was taken from a report by the Venice Commission, which is a commission appointed by the Council of Europe. The Council of Europe is the body involved in the European Convention of Human Rights. And if you want to read more about what happens in any other country, there's a short synopsis in that report of each country. So as well as the table there's a narrative accompanying it. And that particular report, if any of you want to look it up tonight, if you're so inclined, is called Blasphemy, Insult and Hatred. And if you look up Venice Commission and blasphemy, you should get that. But some questions around the floor were as to the detail of particular countries, what the law said or whether the law was in the statute or the constitution. So the answers are all out there. The research has been done. And just on a third point, I'm not sure if the chairman explained that Owen is away for a couple of hours, but he will be back. So we can continue to work over dinner this evening. He's looking forward to answering further questions and having further dialogue with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Leah. And Owen will be actually here in the morning as well before we vote. Now, over to you. If there are questions to any of the people on this side of the room, I would say questions of clarification. We're not going to discuss now the ballot paper. So, but if there are issues that any of these representatives raised at an early stage about which people would like some clarification, you're more than welcome to ask them, or indeed questions to Neville or Leah. Michael, please.
Yeah, just one question to Mark Kelly. In your presentation, you said that the blasphemy laws were an obstacle to, or I think you said that they were an obstacle to interreligious dialogue and debate. Can you point to any examples where the Irish blasphemy laws have been an obstacle to interreligious dialogue or debate in Ireland? Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Michael. Well, I think the one thing that has come out really clearly from almost all of the presentations is that the Irish blasphemy laws are effectively a dead letter. They're effectively in desuetude, and so is the constitutional provision that you're talking about today. So I was making that point more in connection with Ireland's international reputation and the ongoing damage that it does to our international reputation to have that law in the statute book and to have that provision in the Constitution. Because internationally, and here's the point, in countries that are less tolerant and inclusive than Ireland, that is precisely the effect that blasphemy laws have had. And one of the reasons for that is not just between people of religious faith or religious groups, but actually sometimes within religions themselves. There may be different strands within those religions who believe that people who adhere to the other strand are engaging in acts of blasphemy. So in fact, blasphemy laws, and in particular some of the stronger blasphemy laws internationally, have actually been at the root of inter-religious conflict rather than intercultural dialogue and faith. So I was making that point. I think it's a very valid point internationally, and I don't think we should ignore the global context. But like most of the other aspects of Irish blasphemy law, it's very hard to point to an impact here precisely because they do not have an impact. And that includes they do not effectively provide the protection that they pretend to provide for people of faith.
Thank you.
Can I add to that I've had several interviews on RTE before which I've been specifically asked to make sure that I don't say anything that contravenes the blasphemy law. And that in the last 2 weeks, boards.ie, I don't know if you're familiar with it, it's an internet discussion board, it's one of the biggest discussion boards on the internet in Ireland, took down a discussion thread because they had an email saying that something had infringed the blasphemy law, and they felt that given that they have staff and that they have, they're a company that needs to protect itself, they took down that thread on the basis of one email.
Katrina, please. Microphone.
Agus gurmach with the gach duine bhí sé anna simúil ar fad. It was very interesting, all the different presentations. Thanks to everyone. One, I was particularly struck by yours, Mark, and I suppose some of the wording, and we asked for the wording of the Rabat Plan of Action, because what I liked about it, and I know some other people at the table did as well, was it was looking at preventative and punitive. Yeah. So it was coming at it from both points of view. Yeah. And it was also looking at empowerment of minorities, because you can have all the laws in the world, but what you don't want is people in any society feeling unprotected or vulnerable. So my question to you is, I personally would like to see the strongest possible anti-discrimination legislation and proactive in terms of equality laws. If you were writing wording into the Constitution, how would you reflect that?
Okay, well, I'm certainly not, and certainly not before this forum, going to take the risk of actually trying to produce some wording from the platform. But the in principle answer is, Absolutely, that is the intent behind the Rabat plan of action. And I should have said, while I had the platform earlier, there are additional copies of it which are out on the table outside, and it's been uploaded onto your website and to your intranet. It's only 10 pages. I know you've had masses of reading to do, but it's a very good summary, both of the relevant international standards and of current thinking. My neighbour, Dr. Ali Salim, and I had a very good conversation during the break there. And one of the things that we were talking about was precisely that the intention of the ICCL is not to say that people of faith and who hold other beliefs or no belief should not be protected. It is that they should be protected in an effective way that also protects the right to freedom of expression. And in our view, the way to do that is through effective anti-discrimination law in very rare circumstances, in very narrow ways, by criminalising threats which could result in imminent violence. But it's not to do what we currently have. So I think, I don't want to sort of abuse the private conversation that we had, but I think we found a huge amount of common ground because human rights are also about protecting the right to freedom of religion, but about doing that in a way that is responsible, respects the right to freedom of expression. And personally, I think the Rabat plan of action is a very, very clear roadmap to how we could do that. And I think there's lots of guidance in there that could shape a new clause in the Constitution if you decide that that's what we need. But certainly I think there's a need to look again at our anti-discrimination law and also at our incitement to hatred legislation and redraft that in a way that is respectful, not just to people of faith, but also on grounds of gender, race, and a whole range of other grounds, which at the moment are not effectively protected in Irish law.
Dr. Salim, would you like to comment on in a sense, the same question or something else that related to what Marcus just said?
See, the point that I was trying to make in that very brief presentation, that religion is important for many people living in Ireland, and every religion has its sacred values. To have a legislation or a clause that protects and organizes relations among people with regard to these sacred values is very important. It's very important. We in Ireland here have to be proud because although Ireland does not have that long history of integration that we find in other countries, but Ireland has been really successful in encouraging all members of various communities residing in Ireland to positively integrate and perceive Ireland as home. All people who live in Ireland, they see it at home. And how do they see it at home? They see it at home because they feel that they are respected. They feel that their religious values are respected. We want this legislation that protects your religious values, likewise mine. Respecting these religious values, as I highlighted, does not mean that you have to share mine or I have to share yours. It is entirely up to every individual to decide which way to go. But still, if you do not respect my religious values, or I do not respect yours, how then do you expect that we can be in good term? I think every human being has valuable aspects of his life, and he does not like people to offend him regarding these valuables. And taking into consideration the fact that Ireland has become a multicultural and multiracial society, we are desperately in need of legislation that organizes this point. We have different perceptions because we have different education and maybe we have different experience in life. Who decides that what I said is an offense? We need the legislation that can say this to us. We need a reference so that you and I can go back to and say, well, here it is in the legislation. Say, like, as we were talking, that we all have the right to drive, but who gives you the right to drive when the traffic light is red? We need that legislation that organizes and protects these aspects. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, other questions? I'm going to look for people who haven't spoken already today. So Catherine first, maybe, and if then we go to you, Angus.
Thanks, Catherine Murray. I think it was Atheist Ireland in their presentation spoke about the United Nations actually liaising with one of your members, am I correct in that, regarding the laws in Ireland that are on the statute at the moment. I find that rather surprising, because I would have thought the United Nations would have consulted with the Irish government directly if they had concerns over that law.
Yeah, well, and of
Perhaps
course,
you might clarify. Thank you.
Yeah, of course they do. The person who made that statement is Professor David Nash, who has advised many governments, Western governments, on blasphemy laws. He's an international expert on blasphemy laws, and in that context is familiar with Heiner Bienenfeld, who is the United Nations Rapporteur on freedom of religion. And it's in that context that Heiner Bienenfeld has been liaising with David. Now, we are also, like, we're involved on an ongoing basis with the OSCE, with the United Nations, with the Council of Europe, and with various international human rights monitoring bodies, as any civil society advocacy group is entitled to do.
Okay. Is that okay, Catherine? Yeah, okay. Gentleman at the table there.
Andrew Kinsell is my name. Just an observation, if I may, and a question maybe for the panel. I'm struck by, I think Dr. Salim is the only representative of a religious community here today. And I'm just curious to know, was there any submissions or representations given by the largest religious community in the country? 84%, according to the last census, have said they're Roman Catholic. Were there any submissions from the Catholic Church? And I'm just curious as to what their view is on the abolition or otherwise of blasphemy.
Well, just to clarify that, there was no submission from the Roman Catholic Church on this issue. The Irish Council for Churches made a submission within the last few days, and I suppose the conclusion of their submission, correct me, Art, if I'm wrong, was that they recommended that blasphemy should not remain in the Constitution. Is that correct? They had no difficulty with its removal. But I mean, to be absolutely precise about interpreting what they said, it's on the website, and that, if you like, is the formal position of the Irish Council for Churches, which of course is a grouping. Do you want to add, Mark?
Yes. I mean, just to come in briefly, I think that's a very important question, and I have that submission in front of me, Churches in Ireland Connecting in Christ. Now, my understanding was that the submission, I don't think I'm wrong, it's a 2-page submission, it's on your website, is a submission both from the Irish Council of Churches and also from the Irish Interchurch Meeting. And there's a list of the churches currently represented at the end of the submission, which also does include the Roman Catholic Church in Ireland in the version that I'm looking at, which I got from your website. And it explicitly says on page 2, and I'm quoting, "We urge the government of Ireland in making our country a leading example for protection of freedom of religion and conscience." Sorry. Yes, sorry. Here's the quote that I wanted to read to you. I marked earlier. It explicitly says, "Guarantees of freedom of religion and conscience may be better achieved through established or new constitutional and legislative provisions for the protection of freedom of religion, belief and expression, as well as legislation against discrimination and hate crimes," which, in my response earlier to Katrina Rann, is in fact exactly also the position of the Irish Council for Civil Liberties. So it is my understanding, Mr. Chairman, that all of the principal Christian churches in Ireland, including the Roman Catholic Church, are signed up to that as a position, and I would agree with that.
And could I add to that the Vatican at international level is actively involved in campaigning against the use of blasphemy laws in Islamic states against Christians, and in particular has interceded strongly in the case of Asia Bibi, who we mentioned earlier on.
At the back here, please. Yeah.
My name is Farrah Halligan, I'm from Cork. While I kind of have my own personal views on this, like, I know it doesn't affect my day-to-day living, although I do feel that it does create a slightly unfair society. It has no real consequences, but could we take this opportunity, like the panel seems to be agreeing, and it's kind of question for them, can we take this discussion as something that seems kind of a little bit irrelevant, to take it to a way to enforce and create much better laws in Ireland preventing discrimination and clarifying our human rights and our right to freedom of expression, and take it from a discussion that's kind of no real consequences, everyone said, or dead law or whatever. And is it possible to take this opportunity to discuss those kind of things and make it much more clear? And I think that's, I don't know if I'm very clear.
I think that brings you into a much wider field of discussion, which I really don't think we don't have the time to get into on this occasion. If
Tom, can I respond to that briefly? Yeah. I don't think it's of no importance, the mere fact that the law doesn't impact in practice. I think constitutions are ultimately about laying down symbolic values. That's one of the reasons why the criminalisation of blasphemy in the Constitution is so odd, in the sense that it attempts to do something really quite practical within a document which should fundamentally be normative and ideological. And I think, therefore, it does have normative and ideological significance whichever way you go on this. And I think ultimately that's the business of a constitution. Now, that's not to say that your point isn't right here. It may be that the Constitution may need to be completely reformed in order to reflect contemporary normative and ideological values. And maybe it's just too old and needs to be replaced. But I think the mere fact that the law has no practical significance doesn't reduce the level of symbolic significance. And I mean, the points that have been made by the external observers on both sides speak to the normative significance either of keeping or of removing this clause.
Can I add, by the way, it's not the case that it has no significance. I have had personal experience. In RTE interviews, I've been told not to say things that would contravene the blasphemy law. And it's what blasphemy laws do. They have a kind of chilling, self-censoring effect on media. And if you look back at when the pro-life referendum was passed in Ireland, everybody on both sides of that debate assumed that it wouldn't stop women from travelling to England for an abortion. And yet we had the X case, where somebody decided that their conscience was telling them that they had to implement a constitutional provision. And you simply cannot predict what is going to happen when there are these type of clauses in our constitution.
Okay.
They have real impact.
Thanks, Michael. No, I'm not going. I don't want to minimise the importance of what you said, but I think we just. Well, okay. Very quickly.
And my point wasn't that it was of no significance, but that's the feeling that I've heard from some people, that it has no real effect, and it's an irrelevant conversation. And my point was, I don't think it is. I think we can take this conversation and really look at the human rights, the freedom of expression, and like the rabat wording of a law, and make it a stronger law, make it a relevant law, and make it a law that protects everyone within society. That was my point. Not that it was irrelevant. I think it is relevant, but the consensus is from some people that it may not be irrelevant.
Okay, thank you very much. We have that. Alban, I think, is it? Yeah.
Thank you very much, Chair. I just want to make two quick points. The first point in relation to the law and the European Court of Human Rights, that it's clear through Wingrove and the Otto Preminger cases that there is a very wide margin of appreciation for member states. And I think that I think it's Section 36 of the Defamation Act is compliant with Article 10. I think there's absolutely no doubt about that. And therefore, if it is compliant, then I don't think there's any real need to change that. But the point that was made about the practical application has been made on a number of occasions. If we transpose the Danish situation and the cartoons that caused absolute outrage throughout the world, if we transpose that to Dublin, and if that happened here in Dublin, what would the law have done in relation to that?
The law as it currently stands.
It caused such outrage and it caused such offence throughout the world. Would we, with the law as it presently stands, be able to simply say, well, there it is, it happened, there's no recourse to law, tough on you, that you have been offended. I think that that is a very practical situation, and one that we should be contemplating within the context of dealing with this. And my final point is, yes, this is a lot of it is symbolic, but religious symbolism and religion within this country, and indeed throughout the world, runs very, very deep indeed, and we shouldn't just treat it in a trivial fashion.
Thanks, Alba. Neville, did you want to comment?
Just an answer to the question, if the Danish cartoons controversy happened here, would it be prosecutable under the 2009 Act? I would be absolutely 100%. The answer is no, for two reasons. First of all, you would not be able to show that the publisher's intention was to cause offence. The publisher, in that case, said that his intention was to make serious points that he had he'd been trying to, there'd been an author of a children's book who was trying to get an illustrator to draw images of the Prophet Muhammad. This was prohibited under Islam, so therefore it couldn't be done. The editor of the newspaper said, well, look, this is strange, so we're going to seek illustrations to make a political point. So it wasn't, he would have said that it wasn't his primary intention to offend, it was to make a point. And secondly, there would be a defence anyway, because it would be said, look, that on a reasonable level, this would be assessed as having genuine both political and artistic merit. So I've no doubt that it wouldn't be published. I'd also say, just in relation to Michael Eugen's point, I think RT is absolutely wrong to say to you that you shouldn't say this because it would contravene the blasphemy laws, because it won't. And the emails on boards.ie, like a recent case before the Court of Human Rights, where a website was forced to take down comments because of a single threat that it might generate a defamation action. For me, I totally get your point about chilling effect, but it's, I think, a massive misinterpretation of the law that could possibly ground it a blasphemy action. And I really think you've been kind of badly wrong there by RT in that context.
Yeah, but I mean, but it is the reality that is what
okay, Michael, yeah, we have that point.
Can I respond just to another point that was made there that I think is quite significant? Where you have violence in response to publications like the Danish cartoons is in countries where there are laws against blasphemy. You don't have them in countries, democratic countries that don't have blasphemy laws. Because blasphemy laws encourage people to show outrage. And we should be disincentivising that instead of incentivising it.
Thanks. Leah, did you want to comment?
Oh, thanks, Chairman. I just wanted to add as well, sorry, several of the tables asked about this, that the Constitution does, in a separate provision, protect freedom of religion and freedom of conscience. It's in Article 44.2, as several of you had been reading there, and it's subject to public order and morality. So all that layer of protection is there as well.
Dr. Salim, you wanted to have a comment as well.
Just one point I meant to say here. The people reacted in different ways regarding the Danish cartoon, but we have seen, like in Ireland here, we have written a letter and submitted it to the Danish embassy. You see, but in other countries, people reacted in a different way, and I think the different ways in which people reacted was due to the political tension and political exploitation, and not the blasphemy legislation in these countries. Because so many people in other countries, they saw it as an opportunity. I mean, politicians in these countries, they saw it as an opportunity for some local consumption, and that's why they appeared on TVs and condemned it and encouraged people to act and react against that. So I think the reaction was entirely according to the political situation in these countries.
Mark, you want to very briefly, and I also want to give Martin a word as well, if you like, to close out, in the event that you want to say something, Martin. But yeah, Mark first. Sorry, we have Mark first.
Very briefly, just in response to Owen's observation about Article 10 of the Convention. I mean, I think you're right. However, I draw a different conclusion from it than the one that you draw. If the ICCL thought that the current law was a violation of Article 10 of the European Convention on Human Rights, that would have been the headline thing that we would have mentioned when we came in front of you today. We think it may not be, although we question whether it's really necessary in a democratic society like Ireland. But I would turn the question around and say, just because something is actually not a violation or might not be a violation of the European Convention on Human Rights doesn't mean it's a good idea. And it particularly doesn't mean it's a good idea if, as we've heard repeatedly. It's largely, with respect to Michael, ineffective in practice. And most importantly, if there is a better alternative, and the evidence that we have put before you this afternoon is that there is a better alternative, and we think that you'll find it in the Rabat plan of action.
Thank you, Mark. Martin?
Just to reiterate what I said earlier about Ireland being a multi-faith community in a global world community, what is uttered and expressed in Ireland in relation to religion echoes around the world within seconds. And it's something we should be conscious of, because if we denigrate or insult another world religion, that will be carried. And I just think it's something that we should be aware of, that enshrined in our Constitution presently are measures to ensure that that doesn't happen. While we may enact legislation in the future, legislation can always be changed by governments, but the Constitution requires the will of the people to change it. And I just think that that's something we should be conscious of. Thank you.
Okay. Could I thank Michael, Mark, Dr. Salim and Martin for your contributions for this, if you like, supplementary panel that we weren't anticipating, but I think we can allow you to go now. And thank you very much indeed.